inspired. I'm inspired.
Hey there guys, how's it going? My name is Sumit Chatterjee from the Flow Zone Academy, and I'm a flow state coach, which means that I help you feel better and perform better. In this video today, I'm going to be explaining flow state from the angle of Hermeticism. So if you've ever heard of the Kybalion, they mention this idea of the stage of involution. Okay, the stage of involution. Now, I've noticed that there's a lot of overlaps between the stage of involution and the flow state. They say that the stage is one where the all becomes involved or wrapped up in its creation. And you can think of the word wrapped up like wrapping up a present, but also R-A-P-T, wrapped, which means to be fascinated or absorbed by something. Okay, the state of awe. For the time being, it's almost as if the artist, the painter, the inventor, the creator becomes their creation. So the artist becomes the painting. Okay, the rock climber becomes the rock that they're climbing. The writer becomes their writing. This involuntary stage of creation is sometimes called outpouring. Okay, outpouring. The word itself has a lot of similarity to flow, right? Pouring, which is a term we often use for pouring water, right? Overflow, outpouring of this divine energy, just as the evolutionary state is called indrawing. Indrawing and outpouring, indrawing and outpouring, inhale and exhale. The beginning of this evolutionary stage is often regarded as the beginning of the return swing of the pendulum to the pendulum of rhythm. It's almost a coming home, a coming back to the self. But it's also a paradox because it's a losing of the self. This idea is very rooted in all of the Hermetic teachings. You know, one of the first laws being mentalism, which is all is mind. We understand that flow is a mental state, okay? And I noticed that when I'm in flow, I've experienced the most amount of quantum leaps in my life when I'm able to maintain that flow state. Now, a lot of the times, becoming our creation can consume us. So this is really where the calibration or the discernment comes in. Right? For instance, you notice like Heath Ledger had an incredible performance. He became the Joker. However, it started to eat him up from the inside. He started to become crazy. And a lot of actors, you know, they start to get into this space where they're method acting, but then they become so involved in the role that they forget about themselves and forget about their own lives, that they just completely surrender to their character. Of course, I want to remind you that the character, let's say you have a particular character like the Beast, you don't want to become the Beast. The Beast is just an expression of you. It's interesting because attention is a word which has a Latin root. The word attention means to reach out, to stretch out, to expand, right? Attention is actually an expansion where we think of it as a narrowing. But the act of attention, it's interesting the word attention as well, because when you're paying attention, just like an asexual is not feeling sexuality, attention is without tension. Okay, so when we pay attention to something, it takes away resistance because we're not scattered. So attention is really a mental reaching out or an extension of mental energy. So we start to understand this when we really look into our own personal definition for what attention means. You know, in the Samadhipada, they talk about yoga is the control of thought waves in the mind. The stage of involution is a completion of evolution in the human form. It's a phase where the self-consciousness becomes this divine omniscience. If you've ever heard of the term epigenetics, it's basically the study of how your behaviors and your environment can cause changes to the way that your genes work. Epigenetic changes don't necessarily change your DNA, but it changes the way that your body reads a DNA sequence. It's how it interprets or perceives a DNA sequence. Let me give you an example of involution. It's almost like a seed has a glimpse of the idea that it's going to be a tree one day. That's what it feels like. That's that flow feeling of like, you know that your higher self is already on its way, and you catch a glimpse of that divine beingness. And a huge aspect of the stage of involution is the idea of processing delight. Sri Aurobindo talks about this idea a lot. This beingness of delight. The term delight for ananda. Ananda is another term for bliss or joy. However, I think delight is a much better word. And he says that that's the reason for creation, where the absolute extends its delight into a being of multiplicity, losing itself in the unconsciousness, and then delight rediscovering itself through individuals, realizing their divine nature, and then proceeding to spiritual realization. It's almost a precursor to self-realization. The universe was created so delight of the infinite spirit can manifest in all forms of creation. Imagine knowing that you're a part of the bigger picture. It brings you a feeling of delight. It brings you a feeling of delight, right? It's like, I know this. I know that I'm part of the whole. The term involution comes from the idea that the divine involves itself in the creation. Ken Wilber refers to involution in his chapter on cosmic karma. And in his previous work, he talks about spirit into matter as the process of involution. So it follows the reverse stages in a sequence of evolution. So spirit to soul, soul to mind, mind to life, and life to matter. So you're taking from the spirit into matter. Think of it like a reverse Big Bang, right? The Big Bang happens and then it's like involution. You're manifesting now because it's like a... The evolution of spirit is followed by the involution of matter. And the involution of matter is followed by the evolution of spirit. So the way that I describe it is, think of the French word volver, which means to roll, right? So if you take, let's say for instance, a scroll. So let's say you have a parchment or a scroll. This is evolution. Wow, now you can read the information that's in it. Involution is rolling it back into the wholeness, but you know that there's something inside. So what we tend to do as 3D human beings is we try and find a reason for our actions in our creation. You see, the act of creation itself is beyond cause and effect. There is no reason. It just does what it does, okay? It's autotelic in the sense of the flow state of the reason for acting is just because, just for the sake of it. Imagine, Harry Potter saying, I am J.K. Rowling, Can we use this in a practical way? I know it's a very esoteric concept. I know this can get very confusing. So it's almost like you going back to your pure innocence or childlike state. That's one way we can practically apply this. Secondly, we can understand that, okay, if we were tapped into, let's say, the spirit of Atlantis, we understand there was a fall of Atlantis, so we get back and we start to understand that, man, hey, I really was from Atlantis. As a vague example, I'm giving you that. So that involution is that feeling of like going back to the source, right? Going back to the core essence of who you are, your divinity. So when you enter the flow zone or the flow state, you really start to tap into that spiritual essence and that spiritual power. And don't make it so much about getting the job, getting the external reward, which is extrinsic. Focus on the intrinsic results of actually being able to unroll that scroll and get to your core truth and your beingness and your becomingness, okay? So I hope you have an incredible day. I hope this video gave you a new perspective. May the flow be with you and stay legendary. See you next time.